Ponder's excitement rose as the elevator carried him and Hornfels up the historic launch tower. When they got to the top, there wasn't much left except a rickety bridge. "What happened here?" Ponder asked. "We used to have a great big landing pad up here. Maybe that was before your time." Hornfels stepped onto the bridge and looked down past the railing at the charred stumps of the old timber beams. "Guess it wasn't the best idea to make it out of wood, but it did its job. For a while." The bridge creaked underfoot as they got up to the edge of the crater. Fuel tanks and tools were mustered around a barren patch of gravel and packed dirt. "I know it's not impressive, but here we are," Hornfels commented. "Simple is best." Ponder appreciated how they had adapted through decades of trial and error. Still, they wondered why these clever engineers had ever built the launch tower in the first place. They were too polite to ask. They looked up, waiting for something to fall from the sky. They were not disappointed. What started as a bright speck turned into a gangly lump of wood planks and aluminum. It was a Hearthian spacecraft, though, to look at it, you'd never believe that it could fly. It was a marvelous sight to Ponder's eyes. The ship's retro rockets roared out flames and obscured the craft in billowing smoke. As the rumbling cloud came near, Ponder felt the urge to back up. Hornfels didn't. Ponder stood their ground as well, taking a cue from the rocket scientist. Just when it seemed it would smash onto the ground, the engines kicked out a stronger burn. As the pilot inside eased off the analog throttle, the rockets quieted. The landing gear gently settled onto the earth with hardly a sound. Before the smoke had fully cleared, the bottom hatch swung open. A rather small figure hovered down to the dirt with a hum. The noise and the purple glow came from a repurposed Nomai transport ring that guided the crew in and out of the ship. The short Hearthian was wearing a rounded flight helmet. The tube coming off of the respirator circled back to an oxygen tank on their back. The forward chevrons on top and the angle of the visor made a determined, almost aggressive second face for the intrepid explorer. Feldspar held their arms out to the side, making an entrance. "Ta-da!" a gruff voice proudly announced from within. "Never gets old." "Welcome back, partner," Hornfels said. "Been too long." Feldspar cocked their head and played doubtful. "What, you miss me?" "Maybe," Hornfels answered, nodding. "Gets a little predictable down here without you."
Softy,"
Feldspar said with a grunt.
"You know you're welcome to drop by more often. Catch a brew of sap wine on the town."
Still in their suit, the pilot rocked on their heels, thinking about it.
"I hate to go making social calls for myself and leave the girl behind. I'd be down here a lot more if some folks would be more welcoming."
"Oh, don't mind 'em all." Hornfels waved it off and sweetened the deal. "We'll have to catch a bottle around the old campsite. Drag in Porfy and Gosson. Like old times."
"You promise?"
the old veteran said, a bit too seriously. Then they turned their visor to the new face.
"Say, what do you reel in this time?"
"Feldspar, Ponder," Hornfels introduced. "You're Feldspar? I'm excited to meet you." Ponder looked down admiringly at the one they looked up to most, the greatest pilot in Hearthian history. They put their hands on their hips.
"Sure am. The only one."
Then they craned their neck and examined the new stock from hat to boot.
"So you're the kid that wants to be a pilot?"
"More than anything." Ponder tried to keep it cool, but they meant it from the heart.
"Ha!"
The little legends slapped their knee.
"That's the spirit. We'll see."
They peeked behind Ponder to look over their gear.
"You got a suit? You space trained?"
"I've made a few jumps to White Hole."
"That's good."
Feldspar shot a quick quip to Hornfels.
"You brought me a real astronaut this time. I had to do my zero-G training in a cave."
"You were there when it started, right? You've been flying longer than anybody." Ponder gushed. Feldspar whipped up a finger to correct him. Hey, not that long. Ponder held out a palm apologetically. I didn't mean. That I'm old? The little daredevil cut in. Well, I am old. Due to their size, Feldspar punched Ponder in the gut instead of the shoulder. It was playful, but a harder hit than Ponder expected. Can't slow me down that easy. Ponder was more enthralled by the traveler and their ride than all the exhibits in the museum. The aluminum alloy of the frame and wings reflected the sun with a fine polish. The glass dome of the cockpit hardly had a scratch. Even the wood panels were freshly primed and glossy. Is this the ship you've had all those adventures in? Nah, too shiny. This is your ship, if you've got what it takes. After a few more things were settled, they set off. Ponder followed eagerly into the ship. The interior was a little cramped, or you could say cozy. All an astronaut's tools were there, for exploration and repair. Survival kits, rations, and more were tightly strapped down and latched. Moss hung down from the half-rotted driftwood nailed to the ceiling. Apparently this was the new and improved oxygen system. A bucket of seeds and fertilizer was still on hand, if real trees were needed. Feldspar was flying today. This wasn't training, just the ride to flight camp. Once they were both seated and properly harnessed, the old pilot cheerfully asked, Ready to feel what real space travel feels like? Ponder grinned like a schoolchild. Feldspar jammed the throttle down. The engines roared to life to either side of them. Ponder wished their ears weren't so big. The frame of the craft shook, making them anxious that it might come apart. The ship bucked and jumped off the ground, gaining more and more speed. Ponder was pushed down in their seat by acceleration. Was this fear? Well, yes, but also exhilaration. The rockets rumbled and everything rattled. The racket kept up at a tremendous volume, only dimming as they reached thinner atmosphere. There was a creak of pressure as they hit vacuum, and then a calm silence. Chuck waited in her room in the lunar cabin. She focused on the image in the mirror, keeping her hands steady as she applied pale makeup. It was only a touch-up, which was good, since she didn't want to be caught half-finished. After all, she wore layers and layers of it, like a performer or an ancient stranger donning ritual war paint. She sprang for a touch of the blue stuff for a more Hearthian blush, even though it was harder to get. After that, she took black face paint and brushed it on even more carefully. She had practiced the shape over and over, drawing it on faded lines that were already there. It had to be perfect. It was not just artwork, but a religious mask. The simple black outline held a thoughtful circle, the oldest of ancient symbols, an eye. As she finished, she thought out loud, I wonder if there'll be a guy. She frowned and shook her head, careful to hold the brush away from her face as she did. What am I saying? They're all theys. I wonder if there'll be a they who's more like a guy. What to say? She tried another scenario. Hello! Greetings, future traveler. I'm just a regular gal once you get to know me. Oh, that? No big deal, I can explain. Funny story, actually. Worst they can say is no, right? She murmured. She put on a deep, sarcastic voice. I don't want to see you on this planet ever again. Go back where you came from, you ugly thing. She gave a frustrated huff, expelling a lot of air. She looked at her finished touch-up job in the mirror. How about hi? I'll just stick with hi. The computer was running calculations. Orbital trajectories, closing velocity, variable gravity. Time, distance, fuel, all gauges on the dashboard. Everything was math, something that had to be precisely controlled to guide them to safety. This was rocket science, a web of intellectual systems that kept them from spinning off into the void or crashing into a gravity well. But all of it came down to numbers on a screen. Feldspar had their hand on the stick and a throttle. They were flying manual, on instinct. That was made the little being next to him a legend. That was what Ponder wanted to be. No tracks, no receivers, no set destination, just the freedom to soar. The trip through space wasn't so long, but it was a little unnerving. Warp pads are scary the first few times, but it's over in an instant. Now they were surrounded by a vacuum, with nothing to protect them but a thin shell of aluminum and hearth pine. As the pockmarked surface of the Addle Rock loomed in front of them, the old pilot took the chance to have some fun. They threw the ship into a spin. The black of space and the pale lunar surface traded places in the window in front of them. It should have been sickening, but the onboard gravity crystal made it much more bearable. It felt like the universe was moving around them instead of the other way around. A wild turn jolted Ponder to the side. If they weren't strapped in, they would have been bounced around and beat to death on the wall panels. So that's why everything was tied down. Feldspar knew the little ship's limits and ran it in loops through the moon's thin sky. Then the dusty ground filled their view and zoomed to meet them. The falling sensation finally caught up to Ponder. "Oh!" they yelled in alarm, before their stomach tried to come up into their mouth. The deranged coot let out a laugh and a whoop. They weren't making fun of Ponder, just embracing the thrill of it. The old pilot eased them into a graceful swoop, skimming low over the pristine lunar landscape. It's been too long," Feldspar cheered. They looked over to give Ponder a wily smirk, before stiffening into a firm stare. "Don't you ever do something like that. But if a thrust nozzle jams, that's what it would be like, and you need to know how to recover." Ponder gasped for breath and tried to croak out a "Yes, sir." Before they could manage, tall pine trees rose up in their path. Pull up?" Feldspar was unbothered. They'd landed on this spot hundreds of times. The little ship got uncomfortably close to the top of the trees before floating clear over the forest. Rattled as they were, Ponder took in the strangely familiar view. The trees seemed out of place on the harsh landscape, but they grew with unbridled optimism. The Hearthian spirit is in those timbers. The Addlewoods had spread farther than the last time Ponder had seen it on a postcard. "You're just starting off. When I gave you the controls, I expect you to come to a stop a kilometer over your destination and ease it straight down with the landing camera, just like Gosson's manual." Ponder nodded eagerly. They wanted to fly, anywhere. They didn't need to be doing tricks. Feldspar found home base and descended gently into the clearing. White dusk kicked up as they settled into the middle of the lunar outpost. It wasn't much, just a house, a workshop, and a couple of fuel tanks. Feldspar's ship, their own personal ship, was parked to the side to clear the ground for the new vehicle. The pilot flicked several switches, shutting down all their systems. Then they all sat and waited for the dust to settle. Feldspar reverently whistled the opening notes of the Traveler's Chorus. It's good luck to whistle when you drop by. Keeps Esker close. As Ponder unstrapped and surveyed the place through the viewports, Esker was nowhere in sight. The first patriarch of Outer Wilds ventures had long since left for the great beyond. But there was a certain someone waiting for them. At this distance, Ponder couldn't understand what they were looking at. "We ain't had visitors in a while, so Chuck will be happy to see you. Just don't stare." The little old Hearthian was surprisingly spry and beat him to the landing chute. Ponder was still finding their legs in the reduced gravity. They dropped onto the moon's surface, and white gravel crunched underfoot. They turned around and followed Feldspar, ducking under the edge of the lander. Feldspar's only family, their pride and joy, stepped close to him. "Hi, I'm Chuck," a bright voice greeted, and they held out a hand. That's when Ponder saw it with their own 4 eyes, the wildest thing they'd ever seen. It was stranger than quantum mechanics, with all the welcoming energy of a howling waterspout. Ponder gulped and got themselves staring at the alien. It was a traveler, wearing black pants and long-sleeve shirt with a floral pattern of white thread stitched on the front. The being had a cowboy hat to match, but underneath the brim of that hat was an enigma. There was a pale face with 4 eyes, as it should be, but all of them were wrong. 2 of them were fake. Hand-painted pictures of eyes adorned the being's cheeks, giving the facsimile of a familiar face. In the 2 living eyes, sympathetic and interested eyelids housed big black pupils with no iris. The void of those black eyes was haunting and magnetic, like the black hole in Brittle Hollow. This thing person gave a warm smile, its bubbly expression pushing past daunting white tusks. Behind the strange face, golden tendrils hung from the top of its head, gently swaying in an imaginary breeze. It reminded Ponder of a nomad's shaggy mane, but at least it was familiar amphibious flesh, not something strange like hair. They blinked. On a closer look, they saw a regular person, a fellow Hearthian. This person was a member of the frontier culture, following their customs and extending Ponder their hospitality. Remembering their manners, the new trainee shook the offered hand. Chuck had a firm grip, but reassuringly, it was moist and clammy, like any Hearthian. The grip was very firm, in fact, but not solid. Ponder glanced down to see that the 3-fingered hand was not really a hand, more like 3 tentacles in a trench coat, pretending to be a hand. "Hi, name's Ponder." "Well, that's a nice name," the friendly person thing answered. "Everyone I've met is named after a rock." "It's short for Ponderosa. I was raised in the old Nomai city under Brittle Hollow. My parents named me after a plant, by Nomai tradition, but they chose our good old Hearthian pines." "That's swell. Chuck's short for Charlie," she added with a casual wave. "It don't mean anything."
Heh 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 heh.
Feldspar gave an unhinged sort of wry laugh. They pulled off their helmet to show a beaming, rotten smile.
"That's not your name."
Feldspar strolled up beside her and proudly announced,
"That's not her name. She's Chardy, with a D. Charred as in burnt to a crisp. Come here, my little Chardine."
"Ugh," she groaned. She towered over him, but now she wilted with embarrassment. They squeezed her in a tight hug. As rotten as the old coot could be, it was sincere affection. She overcame her annoyance and returned the embrace. They turned again to Ponder.
"And let me tell you why."
"Do you have to? It's a long story," Chuck excused.
"It's a good story," they answered with a pointed finger. "Y'all hungry?"
They gathered to the dinner table for a balanced meal of sardines and mallows. Chuck had a much bigger plate, more like a shallow bowl, heaping with a lot more fish than the other 2 could stomach. Feldspar could scarcely put food in their mouth. They were busy gesturing and regaling their guest with the tale they started while they were cooking.
"So there I was, stranded in the midst of a horrible nightmare dimension, surrounded by spiky vines, not knowing when a monster the size of a house was stalking through the fog. My only shelter was in the mouth of a giant skeleton. The monster had been killed by the only thing more unstoppable than the beasts, the bramble itself. Just one seed had lodged in its gut, and grown until it burst the thing open from the inside."
Ponder slowly chewed a sweet mallow, listening with rapt attention.
"There, surrounded by death and danger, I took the risk of lighting a fire. It was the only way to keep warm. Stranded for days on end, down to the end of my rations, eating disgusting things you wouldn't dream of. No hope of rescue. There I was, wondering if I'd ever get out. And then, this blobby little thing swims past me, and it dives straight into the fire. They cut a mirthful glance to the strange being. Now, I could have just let it cook and have a little meal. Chuck groaned again. Feldspar went on. But I felt bad for it. I pulled the poor little thing out. Poured a little water on its burns. It wouldn't keep a solid shape, like nothing I'd ever seen. Then we have a moment. It looks into my eyes and makes this little squeal. I knew in that moment that I was holding,
Dad? Chuck interrupted with a much firmer tone. They turned all four eyes to her for a moment, then back to Ponder.
That I was holding a girl.
Ponder gasped.
A girl?
They asked.
Well, you know how some animals are male and female? Some people are like that too. That's why I call her stuff like she and her.
Yeah, I'm a real girl, she said proudly. She casually tossed a sardine into her mouth. Took a second to reach the bottom. I know it's weird. Hope it's not too much trouble. You can call me they if it's easier. Ponder shrugged. No, it's not weird if that's what you are. The Nomai were male and female too. I used to spend hours reading the writing they left on the walls. It's all she's and hims, moms and sisters and dads. Feldspar furrowed their brow for a moment. I forget you kids have always had translator tools. Back in my day, we couldn't make heads or tails of those loopy hieroglyphics. We just spent hours staring at a wall and come away none the wiser. If your species is male and female, that's good by me, Ponder reassured. But they couldn't put off their curiosity anymore. What, exactly are you, miss? If you don't mind me asking. I'm a Hearthian.
Oh.
I'm a Hearthian, and I don't want people to treat me like I'm... Well... Her real eyes looked down at the table. Some people don't like having me around. After a moment of silence, Ponder spoke up again. Some people aren't interested in spaceships after the warp towers came on. But I'm here because you're not those people. You're... father, we like to say, Feldspar added. Your father's as adventurous at home as they are in the cockpit. Feldspar gave him a suspicious squint, not knowing how to take that. No, that's a good thing, Ponder insisted. Then they added their own tall tale, legends they heard when they were younger. They say Ryback and the hatchling were both on Brittle Hollow during the eruption. A third of the planet's surface broke off and fell into the abyss that day. And those two were jumping platform to platform, right in the middle of it. They didn't know which piece would fall next, but that didn't stop them. They believed they would make it, and that was enough. Feldspar cut in. Well, Ryback is the greatest archaeologist there is, but I don't know how much of a risk taker. A sly smile crossed their lips as they changed gears. Oh, never mind. I'm sure they jumped from the crossroads of the Hanging City by boosting with the last of their reserve oxygen and finding an air pocket in the nick of time. Really? See what I mean? Incredible. Feldspar chuckled deviously and nodded. Nowadays, people back home refuse to set foot on a section of city if it isn't reinforced with railings and double safety nets. That's not how we got here. That's not the frontier. Ponder finished with a shake of their head. Chuck propped her face on her elbow and grinned through her big teeth. I think I'm going to like you for real. Their tutor seemed to agree. If it's the frontier you want, you come to the right place. It's an honor to be here, sir. You're a flying legend. But it's good to know you have a soft spot, too. Feldspar almost argued with him.
You got me there. Anything for my girl.
Then they turned goo-goo eyes toward the, precious person. The very normal Hearthian answered softly, "Love you too, Dad." Feldspar whipped back to Ponder with a stern glare.
But you ain't in my soft spot yet, so watch it.
The rookies straightened up in their seat. Yes, sir.
I'm sure you will be after I show you the ropes, Feldspar said, easily falling back into their sly smile. You just gotta show me what you're made of. That new bird's not gonna fly itself.